There we go. Now, hopefully... Aha! This should be better. This is embarrassing. That's been a few minutes. I was just trying to explain the rules and everything, and it's not even coming on. Well, luckily this is going to get better as I do more live streams. But like I was trying to say, if it turns out it's going to be a bit boring with the stuff, then I can just, of course, make videos and things like that. Excellent. Perfect. Now, I was saying, yes, I remember you, Raucha. You've been commenting on a few of my programs and things. So, any topics that came to mind? Anything that you wanted to know about with regards to historical fighting, or about myself, or anything, really? To be honest, I'm having a bit of a difficult to come up with ideas for videos. I've got a nice little pop-out window, which you'll probably be seeing, with the video, and I can basically answer anything. In fact, I did post this across social media, so hopefully a few more people will be around to maybe ask a few more questions as well. Can you hear me? Ah! I've been practicing HEMA. Now, I started around... I'm just going to get up, I tend to pace about. I actually started around when I was about 18. Now I'm 24 now, so I've been doing this for around 5 or 6 years. I mean, of course, it wasn't exactly at my birthday or whatnot, but yeah, about 6 years. It's been only occasional practice, so usually I'd be going to the club around sort of once a week or something. Actually, it was kind of weird, because at first I didn't have as much enthusiasm as I did now. It's weird, with most things you imagine kind of, you know, a person finds this new exciting thing, a bit like when you buy a power tool and you just want to have it all the time, but it was kind of the opposite. I kind of was sort of on the outside thinking, is this the sort of thing I want to get into? But as I got more and more into it, and learning about how it all goes, you know, it's that idea of the more you learn, the more you realise there is to learn, I got more and more enthusiastic. So, I mean, I was only able to go to the club once a week because that's pretty much the only way they have it. But I started going to things like the Swords and Cider. I've not really done any recording of that, except the Swords and Cider compilation, which I did a few years ago, and that was when I went to my first ever one in the same year. And it was, you know, we were doing things like test cutting, so chopping up bottles, which is good for getting things like edge alignment, and, you know, if it was a real target and you were splitting someone's skull open, making sure you get that nice flowing cut or multiple cuts, a bit like when people using katana chop up those tatami mats and such. We had some people going around and showing us certain techniques, and we had a random weapons tourney. There was even a clip in there, which was one of my proudest moments in early HEMA, because I was pretty useless back then, but I managed to... I was fighting against this Frenchman who was actually equally unskilled, and in a random weapons tourney, he picked out a two-handed sword ticket. Good on him. And then I picked out the joke plastic bottle ticket. Suffice it to say, I didn't win, but I did have this moment where I did manage to get a point, and I was being a bit reactive and defensive, and was kind of using my bottle to smack his weapon away ineffectively because there wasn't really much of a threat. And I just heard the people in the crowd going, "Come on, Johnny, bottle him!" So I kind of whacked up at his weapon to cause that contact and make him think I was doing the same thing, but I then kind of sort of ducked down and then whacked him in the legs. And I mean, it was just a plastic bottle. I mean, the amount of physical harm was nil, but somehow, maybe it was just the shock of the fact that I actually struck him. He nearly fell over, and luckily it was one of the parts I caught on the video. It was hilarious, but yeah, like I say, it's that idea of the more I got into HEMA and doing things like King of the Hill games and other stuff, the more I enjoyed it. In fact, it's interesting. It's a bit like archery, really, because you've got the serious aspects. You know, you're there you know, you've got the text, you've got the information, the instructors telling you, okay, now we're doing these drills today, learning this, this, and this in this particular way, in that sort of regimented, structured way. But then there are other times, perhaps you're doing sparring or special events, and then even during a normal training session, we sometimes have stuff like King of the Hill. So it's kind of, you know, a bit like in archery, you'd have maybe Poppin Jacob, you know, coconut shy, here's a target, or splitting a wand, here's a stick in the ground, shoot an arrow into it. In the same way, in HEMA, you get fun games like King of the Hill, where there's a person who's got maybe 3 lives, come get me, and then you've got these people who've got to be as challengers, and yeah, we've got to take down the king, or defend the wall, or defend a bridge, some kind of name like that, where you'd have pretty much the same sort of rules you'd have doing normal sparring, or doing some kind of tournament, except a melee. You'd got this group of people against another group of people, and maybe some people have got 2-handed swords, sword and shield, and maybe someone's going to get a polearm, hopefully, and, you know, the way it all mixes up, it's, of course, you've got this serious aspect where you're studying historical treatises where people, you know, went to war. This is a bit like, you know, the wars of Afghanistan and the rest that have been happening in these time periods. You know that some of these people went into fights to the death, and some people had gone to war and actually killed people. But on the other hand, although you're learning that serious stuff, you've got nice fun and games as well, because you can put those techniques, these lethal, deadly techniques, into, you know, grabbing a synthetic weapon and smacking someone about in some grandiose melee game. But yeah, long story short, I've been doing HEMA for about 6 years. Anything else? That's just something I was going to use for background on a clip once. There we are. Just a bit when it was raining. I was going to use that for my green screen. Which weapons or treatises do you practice? No practice try. Let's see, talking about sword and buckler. Ah, yes. Now this is interesting. To be honest, I'd say at least about 90% of the training that I did was, well, actually Fiore's treatises. It so happens that the club that I was training with, the Iron Door Collective, were doing Fiore de la Berry's treatises, and a lot of stuff like Two-Handed Sword, but they also covered stuff like, usually they tend to try and do it in almost like a syllabus. They're not the sort of club where everything's absolutely regimented and, you know, always in a set structure, but when they're trying to do organised lessons, you know, so people are learning enough, normally you've got sort of, you could almost say a bit like a syllabus, so very often, like in most HEMA really, there's stuff on Two-Handed Swords, because there's just so much information on it. In the same treatises, there's stuff around Arming Sword. We haven't done much of that, but we've been trying. We've done a few things on Unarmed, which is a good bit of grounding, because with most weapon styles, you know, if you get too close, you're going to end up wrestling with someone and doing kind of taekwondo and that sort of stuff, style moves where you're doing grapples and throws, maybe say hip throw or a wrist lock or those kinds of things. And similar situation with Fiore's dagger treatises. So we even have this thing we tend to do with, and I've even myself been allowed to do some instructing to the newest guys doing dagger, and we have this thing. I actually did it in my video where I was teaching my best friend Ryan dagger. It was a flowing drill that we do, and it was first master, third master and ninth master of Fiore's dagger, which would be, the first attack was a bit like a horror movie, stab someone holding an ice pick grip of a dagger, stabbing down at maybe the head, neck, collarbone kind of area, and then sort of doing a disarm for that. And there was another one for sort of going around under the right armpit, so going from the left outwards. And then there was a third one, which is a bit like a chav stab, you know, overhand grip, stabbing into the gut. And there'll be ways to disarm that, and they'd flow into each other. Now here's an interesting one. But yeah, basically in summary, most of what I've done is Fiore. Stuff like Sword and Buckler I've done with other clubs at special events like the May Melee. And so I have a bit of a working knowledge and general knowledge in terms of stuff like Buckler and Saber. But I'm not an absolute expert, such as someone like Matt Easton, who's very good at Saber. Now I see another question. How do you think the best swordsman today compared to those back in the medieval period? Now, I would personally think of it a bit like, well, pretty much what you'd see in soldiers today. You get some people who are just sort of militia, you know, people who aren't really trained. And let's be honest, sometimes peasants and people were drafted into levies, and it wasn't like Aragon or something where the farm boy can really hold his own in battle. It's going to be some, you know, guy who's maybe been equipped with a spear and has been given some basic training, or maybe not even that, and can't really fight very well. But to be honest, with what we're doing in the treatises, although there are certainly styles like unarmed fighting, where we've been learning from stuff like Wing Chun and all of that, I'd say maybe, in that sense, some of the unarmed aspects of fighting, around society and in martial arts circles especially, are perhaps better, because you see, for example, there's a lack of groundwork in unarmed. So if someone, say, throws you down to the floor, the assumption would be in a medieval period kind of, you know, they get their dagger out and you're dead. Whereas in these days, they try to have stuff like shrimping to get out of someone on top of you and things like that, so in that sense it's better. But to be honest, when it comes to stuff like sword fighting, I mean, the reasons we're looking at the treatises, you know, the original manuscripts from around 1300s and later, are because we still don't know that much. We've got certain other styles we can guess based on stuff like Eskrima, Chinese, Dao, Japanese katana styles that have been preserved much better. But in terms of trying to use something like an arming sword or a boar spear or something effectively, we're really having to go right back to basics. You know, we're having to look at these treatises and almost kind of experiment. So, oh, well, in a picture it kind of looks like this and this. Maybe it happens like that. Oh, no, you get me quite easily. Maybe they meant like this, and you're kind of going like that. And, you know, doing educated guesswork based on essentially just old pictures and some text we've had to translate and try to get context from. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. In summary, stuff like unarmed, since we've got all the other styles like Wing Chun, they are better because there's more diversity in the styles and in terms of techniques and the core basics as well. But when it comes to using the medieval weapons, I'd say that the best swordsmen of then would have had access to stuff like we're reading now in treatises, and more. You know, they wouldn't just have equivalents of picture books to look at, they'd have proper masters. You know, the best swordsmen will have maybe some other master, and some of the people writing treatises actually say that. You know, I trained under this guy who's really famous. And we're sat there thinking, oh boy, I wish we could have met that guy, but he's kind of 400 years dead. So yeah, we're still definitely trying to work along as we go, so there aren't really any masters of sword fighting, I'd say, in the modern era. Especially since, you know, nobody's ever had to kill someone with a sword, and back to the grim reality, you know, there are certain techniques that maybe masters would have put in treatises, and they'd be saying, yeah, this is all good. We don't really know if that's going to work or not. You know, it's like with martial arts today. You can have people who do street fighting of unarmed or whatnot, and they'll say, that style's bullcrap. You know, they say, well, I've tried it and tested it, it doesn't work, they're just going off on one. Whereas they'll say, but this style, what you see in this, this, and this, it works. Of course, since nobody's killing each other with swords, and hopefully it'll stay that way, we don't have reliable ways to know exactly what things work and what don't. For example, famously on Scalibrim's channel, there's that silly meme going around about end them, right them. And I think that's one more blatant example of something that doesn't work, because, you know, you've got a sharp weapon, you can do like a Mordhau, which is holding a sword upside down and smashing an opponent's skull in with the pommel of your weapon. You know, those sorts of things work, but unscrewing the pommel, taking it off, and throwing it at someone to, quote, end them rightly, unquote, I think that's a joke, actually. So, but for the rest, when ones look like they're genuine, and maybe someone's peddling them as genuine, but they're actually just rubbish, how are we going to know that, We've got to experiment. It's difficult, Hopefully, I can answer the next question a bit less of a complex fashion. Well, I suppose going back to Rauchar's question just for a minute until I get the next question. With regards to stuff like Sword and Buckler, I have done some individual sort of lessons with people who are pretty good at it, and when I went to the main melee, there are certain core concepts that you learn, even if you don't know every exact I-33 manuscript technique and all the complex stuff. There are certain basics, like, oh, you're welcome, Gaylord. But yeah, there are certain simple stuff, like putting a buckler in front of you quite a bit. Actually, I've just received the question. Right, so what do I think of Kingdom Come Deliverance? A really accurate representation. Yes, I agree. It is going... Kingdom Come Deliverance, it looks like it's going to be very realistic. They actually it's quite well-timed question, actually. They recently released a trailer, and of course they were showing it's very realistic in terms of the costumes, and the actual styles of the amazing castles, and reminds me of stuff like the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, how much they kind of put so much detail into setting up these towns and cities and things that will be so exciting. But when it comes down to the actual fighting, there's a similar degree of attention to detail. Obviously, they've got to simplify it. What I imagine that will be happening is they'll probably have some of the core techniques, like what's called a Schielhau or a Zwerchhau in the German stuff, which is a bit like a kind of helicopter movement. You kind of start with sword. It's hard to explain. It's probably best to cover in another video, but, well, I mentioned it when I did my main melee review, but basically certain techniques which are fairly basic, where someone starts in a position, let's say a window guard in Italian style, so you'd have the sword, the hilt's level with your head, point facing straight towards the opponent, and then it's easy to kind of cut and thrust from. So you'd have those kinds of basic stances represented in... I saw in the game they've got it represented of different angles. You kind of raise up into your attacks and defences from there. So they'd probably just have stuff like Falcon, which is where the sword is just straight above your head. You see it a lot in movies, that's one thing they do get right. So you'd have positions and basic stuff like that. And then you'd have a simple attack executed like your simple cleaving in twain. I'm going to cut him diagonally from shoulder to hip. Bam! You can easily imagine an attack, and that's just in Italian called a fendente, or in German called an Oberau, and those sorts of things. So you'd have, simple sort of attacks and defences, and just with those you can get a lot of, diversity going on. So in terms of animating, it's not really as difficult as people would say. But what I'm interested and excited about is they mentioned they'll have, I don't know what they called it. It sounds a bit like, in some games they get executions, where your opponent's on 10% health, and then you say, okay, boom, I press the magic button, and it executes like a really cool, bam, chop, and then he's dead kind of thing. It sounds like they're going to be doing a bit of that, where if you get enough sort of successful hits and stuff going on in a row, you then execute kind of, realistic, something like, go bind with their sword, you turn going round their pommel, and then kind of execute a leg throw from there, and then maybe stab them on the ground. Wahaha, I win. And you could easily have that as an animated set piece. It'd only look awkward if you're maybe on a hill or something, but again, you could probably get over that by maybe something even easier. Technique I've mentioned a few times, which is the exchange of thrusts. And what happens is, person stabs at you, you have your sword facing up towards the sky, not, face down, instead of a hanging defense. You then just put that sword and push it slightly offline, not doing anything to swing and bat it out. And then, once you've got it met up with your quillons, and there's the blade sat on there, you know where it is, you just kind of point the sword at their face, slide along, and thrust them. Now, you can imagine if it's animated awkwardly and you're on a hill or on some stairs or maybe one's fighting from the top of a cart or something, you could execute that really easily. You just need to bend the torsos and whatnot. You get the same animation with the arms going, and you don't really need to do much in terms of footwork, or maybe have the person step forward once or something, and then boom. So it's certainly really, some people say, oh, you can't do it realistic, because it's so difficult to put that into a game, but actually, as they're proving it, it's going to be really good. You can have some nice techniques in there, as set animation pieces, and some basic stuff as core fighting dynamics, and make a good thing out of it, which perhaps will be my favourite game for close combat instead of Exanima, because I like Exanima, and I've loved it so much because it's physics-based, You get some attacks where you've got kind of, I'm barely in measure, my tips may be scraping the torso, and then it does maximum damage. I'm at the perfect range, it does maximum damage, and I'm right next to hilt, I'm practically just punching them with my hand instead, maximum damage in those games. Whereas in stuff like Exanima, and they mentioned in some of their development videos in Kingdom Come Deliverance as well, they'll be looking at stuff like, where did you hit your opponent? Did you maybe augment it by stepping in a direction? If I'm cutting from right to left to chop the person around their hips and cleave them in twain, if I'm kind of backing off away from them and, stepping away, it's going to actually make me do less damage by playing safe like that. But maybe I'm stepping in and I'm swinging as I'm doing that, just like in Exanima. In Kingdom Come Deliverance, they'll have it that maybe that augments damage. I'm doing a thrust, but I'm not just thrusting, I'm stabbing them while I'm running towards them, and the guy's running towards me, and then BAM! Double damage or something. They did something a bit similar to that on Mountain Blade Warband that I played. They had that how fast you're running towards your opponent, you got a sort of speed bonus. And of course got really extreme when you're on horseback. So they'll probably be having something like that. And, it's just, it's stuff that takes time and requires effort to get it scripted properly, but it's not something that's impossible or unimaginable. And I think once we've got stuff like Kingdom Come Deliverance, it's really going to set a benchmark, And I feel like playing Examiner teach you a whole lot about footwork and distance and timing, not so much. Yeah, actually, Raucha, that's a very good summary, really. Yeah, exactly. When you're looking at stuff like Exanima, you're not going to get any technique. In fact, I was noticing the other day, I tried playing it on my other attempt at a live stream, and what was happening was, I was noticing actually, the guys almost had their arms bent at a right angle, so if I was chopping out the sword, I'd be doing, especially if a straight edge rather than curved blade for draw cuts, I'd want to extend the arm. It's a bit like casting a fishing rod. Bam! Extend the arm out, and I'm adding extra sort of a flicking motion to cut in, as well as, of course, the full body, twisting the hips and shoulders and powering into that. Whereas in Exanima, they had their arms sort of quite bent and quite close to them, like they were, trying to cut someone who was 2 feet away instead of 6 foot away from them. But yeah, it was good for footwork. One thing that games tend to get wrong, that Exanima got right, was indeed the footwork. Because in games like, what I hated about games like Elder Scrolls Oblivion was that I called it roller skates fighting, anyone's running around, anyone could probably have fallen over in real life, but they're just slashing and running back and forth all over the place. Now here's an interesting one. Much like Deadliest Warrior, which melee fighter throughout the ages would win in a one-on-one duel? Medieval knight, Japanese samurai, or a Viking? It's an interesting one. It depends on the time period, but and of course the individual fighter is usually going to be the best determiner. So if you had someone who's maybe got samurai kit and is an official samurai, but perhaps for whatever reason actually turns out to be really poor at their job or something, and he went against someone like a Bronze Age warrior, with pretty, in comparatively inferior equipment, and yet actually is very well trained, perhaps like a Spartan, I think that person's going to win. But if we wash it all down, we say the people are going to be of equal amounts of training, equal amounts of experience, and equal understanding of each other. That's another factor. because knight, samurai, or Viking, one thing that would help one person win against the other is how much they know of the other. It's like one of the things that helps me whenever I'm fighting against people who do stuff like kendo, is that I happen to have a person in my club who has previously done kendo. That's why he was so good at sword fighting to begin with, rather than me starting right from the basics. So hence, fighting against someone who does that Japanese stuff meant that if I was in the place of the knight, I have an advantage against a samurai because I don't know everything, I'm not a master of the samurai techniques, not at all, but I've practiced and studied someone and people who do that stuff, so I have some idea of what they're going to do, and that's an advantage. But right the way condensed, if we assume all of those factors are the same as well, including how much they know each other, I'd put the Viking out because unfortunately their equipment, it's a bit unfair really. The Viking age goes up to, I would say it stops at 1066, the Viking age, because ignoring the Battle of Hastings, one of the earlier battles was basically almost like a last-ditch attempt. This was the Viking era's coming out, and it was the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and it was the way where they showed that people were setting up castles and having professionally trained forces, and were starting to beat the Vikings, and knew the guys' tricks, and basically their age waned and then came out. So it's unfair for the Vikings because they're actually from basically when the Vikings end around the 1000s, 1100s, was around the time when the medieval knights and Japanese samurai started to come in. So it's a bit like comparing, one of Oliver Cromwell's New Model Army from the 1600s to, one of the revolutionary armies or redcoats from the 1800s. It's a bit unfair for them, and it's reflected in their armour and weapons. They had pattern-wielded swords, which tend to be less perfect and less reliable than, say, a homogeneous, arming sword, or a very properly tempered and designed samurai katana. And things like their armour, they had mail armour. So the best armour a Viking can get is the worst armour a knight can get. A Viking just means, any kind of sea raider in that sort of time period from around Norway and around those areas. So the worst armour a Viking could have is 0. They could be having clothing, just nothing at all the way up to very wealthy and good quality Vikings who'd be wearing stuff like a gambeson, mail armour, proper iron helmet. Good stuff. But that's the worst that a knight would wear. Anyone who's rich enough to be of the knight class would be wearing at least something like a gambeson, mail armour, and an iron helmet. And that's earlier on. When we go later on, of course, they start developing stuff like brigandine and plate armour. Then it's cheating in terms of, I can make more mistakes than you and not die earlier on. Which hence also applies to Japanese samurai getting an advantage as well, because their time period, they're starting at around the time when the Vikings were on their way out. So they're out. Samurai on knight is really difficult. I would barely give it to the knight, because I mentioned earlier, the ones who knew each other the most would have the best advantage. The samurai really just fought people in Japan, and samurai fought against Ashigaru, the sort of foot soldiers of Japan, and other samurai themselves. I don't know of any times, except when the Europeans started to come in at later eras. It's that situation where they didn't really fight much elsewhere, whereas the knights are known for their crusades, where they fought against the Moors and Turks and people like that, the Egyptians. They, of course, fought against each other, so you had people with things like bows, the English longbowmen, and then the Genoese crossbowmen, and these mercenaries, and the Swiss, and stuff like the sort of Swiss guard, guarding a pope, and all of these people from all over the place. Although it was around Europe, they fought beyond into Africa, and sometimes tried to head out towards Asia a bit, so they had more experience fighting against different people. A bit like how the Romans adapted their techniques and their equipment as they fought and grew their empire. So in that sense, I'd just barely give it to the knights, but apart from that, they've got good quality swords, they've got good quality armour, they've got professional training, you know, they'd all be very good fighters, so it'd be narrow, and like I say, it'll end up coming down to the individual warrior with such a narrow margin for error. Our next question came from Riz Barker. When did you know you liked swords and shit? And how did you pursue your hobby? It was a weird one. When I was a very young kid, I liked trains. I quite liked the sort of mechanics and those sorts of things around it. It was almost like an obsession I'd go down to. Funny story, actually, I might cover it in a video one day. I actually got my iron eye, as I called it, where I stuck my head out of the window of a train wanting to see what was going on in front of the carriage, and from the train smoke I actually got a fleck of metal in my eye, and stuff unfolded from there. But later on, it's kind of like a lot of people. A lot of people, you know, end up sort of playing video games and or watching TV and kind of like the night. I was a bit like that, really. I was playing stuff like Darkstone back in the day and various other games with fighting, and I kind of liked it. But I always felt a bit disillusioned. You get some stuff we can't tell what's historically accurate or not, like in a documentary. You know, you can't tell everything that's right and wrong about what a historian's saying, but when you're looking at fantasy, you've got a lot of moments where, you know, that's blatantly just artistic license. It's fine, but you know that's not real. And I didn't want to be necessarily, you know, horrible to people and go around saying, you're wrong, that's wrong, bad. But I did myself personally want to know, okay, so if this isn't the real thing, or this might not necessarily be 100% correct, I wanted to know about the real deal. You know, I wanted to really find out what it's like to be a knight. It was so exciting, you know, it's that kiddish sort of, want to swing swords and be a knight with a code of chivalry and all that. So I kind of got into that. So I took up archery when I was 16, and I was looking at stuff like American flat bows and English longbows. Then when I was 18, I discovered my HEMA club. So I started going and started learning, okay, this is the real deal. They're trying to learn from ancient treatises and stuff how real knights fought for realsies in the medieval period, rather than stuff like stunt actors trying to create a show rather than focus on, you know, the real deal. What medieval fantasy weapon used against a robot? The Dwemer machinations of Elder Scrolls such. You know, this is a weird thing. People have these sorts of questions. You'd think nobody would think of that. I've actually thought a lot about this sort of topic, actually from playing stuff like Skyrim, but actually also imagining if there was a futuristic world where the synths from Fallout 4 or, you know, other robots from iRobot were threatening humans, and I was the stalwart warrior I am, because I'm not great with firearms, I'm only able to use shotguns and skeet shooting. So I thought, so if I'm probably going to end up using a close combat weapon, what would I use? Definitely blunt weapons. Robots would be designed, presumably, to help against people trying to smack them to bits. So unless it's something like Fallout 4 synth design, where you've got kind of just the skeletals, if it's just a skeletal structure made out of metal, and you've got this kind of synthetic plastic, you know, make me look like a human android kind of look, then maybe it's fine to use a sword or a knife or something, because then you've probably got exposed wires in the same way as you've got guts and internal organs on a real person, and you can cut those up perfectly fine and then terminate the robot in the same way as you kill a human. But if it's a robot, something like the Dwemer you mentioned in the Elder Scrolls, then at that point they've got external hulls and shells, so it's a bit like fighting an armoured knight. You've either got to find gaps and then, you know, stick a point of a sword in there and then get into the internal wiring instead of getting into eye sockets and, you know, internal veins, or basically to save all that hassle and just any hit will do sort of fashion, which frankly is going to be much better in a chaotic fight, then yeah, something like a mace or a warhammer will do best. So I would probably go for something like a mace and a shield. Maybe a buckler, maybe a strapped shield, something like that. And I'd also want to wear, you know, whatever's going to be good against the robots. So I'd have armour that's either going to be ballistic resistant, perhaps if they like to punch and squish humans, then actually, rather than having a bullet-resistant vest, I might want to go for something like a padded gambeson, so they can give me those robot hugs to death and not suffer a cracked rib, you know. So I'd basically want to adapt my weapons and armour to what the design of the robot is. And of course, if the robot is even larger still, and is going to be sort of almost building sized, then I might adapt my techniques entirely to actually having things like climbing equipment and things to get around the robot, and then try to get inside and take it apart that way. So basically, it's one of the things, it's just like how warfare developed over the medieval period. You've got different people and different opponents using different types of equipment and armour, and with much the same with robots, depending on what sort of frame and hull and wiring setup they'd have, I'd want to adapt techniques to that. So if they've just got exposed wires and they're flesh-like to be androids, I'd probably want to use a sword to chop up those wires and terminate them easily. If they're more sort of Elder Scrolls Dwemer style robots, you know, with plating and armour on, I'd want to smash them to bits with a good old mace, basically. And if I can get my hands on a shotgun with slugs, then I'd want to face blast them as well. Yeah. Anything else? Oh, this is turning out to be better than I thought. Interesting stuff. Thanks. Sometimes I wonder what you guys think about the new style with the green screen I'm using. So I noticed it was kind of a bit boring. It was always my living room, you know, talking and swinging swords in front of the camera. But I don't always have as much space to do that kind of stuff. You know, showing techniques or just swinging items about, because with the way I've got to set up the green screen, I don't end up having as much room in the area. So I sometimes wonder what you guys think, whether you like those videos more, or whether you'd rather have a boring background but have me get enough space to swing stuff around. But speaking of which, I'm gonna... Oh, have you played the story mode in Exanima? It's an interesting one. I have actually played some of it. You wouldn't think so, and it is reflected in my actual gameplay. I don't really play much story mode. I have, and I've gotten to the point where it was getting to those weird, a bit like the Dwemer ancient ruins in Elder Scrolls. It was stuff like that with the weird metal gates and the skeletons trying to hit you and all of that stuff. But I haven't really played much. It's one of the reasons why I've not really recorded much of it. It's not that I prefer recording the arena. Well, actually I do prefer recording the arena anyway, but I've not really found it quite so fun. It's not really the style of the story. You've got scrolls and books which give backstory and information about the lore. Sorry if my camera's wobbling about, I'm swinging a kukri in the meantime. But yeah, I haven't liked the story as much because the way it's designed, I'm not quite so happy about. There are people who clearly disagree with me. I've tried on the Exanima forums talking about this, and I've received a lot of negative feedback. But I personally feel that the lighting is not moody and, you know, atmospheric so much as obstructive. Because you've got the classic problem of the AI and the way it works. So, let's say I open a door and I go into a room. It's pitch black. Now, one of three things will happen. I'm using a torch, you know, the flaming torch, and a shield to help with my defense. I'm using my weapon, you know, a particular sword or something, single-handed weapon only, and a torch to give a bit more offense, and maybe parry of that. Or, of course, I go in blind, and I'm fighting against my opponent with my weapon and shield, but I can't see a damned thing. Now, option 3 would be interesting if it worked. The problem is, because the AI is designed in its ordinary sense, it doesn't matter how much or how little how little lighting you've got, rather, your opponent can still see you. So if I enter into a pitch black room, and then my opponent enters into the pitch black room, guess what? That ghoulish apparition thing, which is pretty much like a man, is going to see me as if we're in the best, you know, we're lit up like a football stadium. So he's going to be there. Oh yeah, he's this far away. I'll do this, and I'll go chop chop. Oh, he's acting like he can't even see me. Oh, I'll go this and this, and whoa, killed him. Whereas I'm sat there going, I can't hear a damn thing. Oh, I just heard myself get smacked. I think it's coming from the left. Swing, swing. I just killed the air. Oh, where is he? Oh, I just got stabbed, and that kind of stuff. So it does spoil it a bit, to be honest. It's that thing where some people don't find it that annoying, but I find it really obstructive that you've got, if there's no sneaking dynamics as such, and you've got these enemies who can see you perfectly in the dark areas, and there are a lot of dark areas, not the occasional, you've been going through the well-lit hallways, and here's a few nice bright spots and whatnot. It's that you're going from pitch black room to pitch black room to poorly lit room to maybe, wow, here's a room that's got pretty decent lighting, to pitch black room to pretty dimly lit room again. So it's something that ends up becoming a serious problem. I hope they, by the time they have their later versions, they maybe have it either less obstructive and oppressive darkness, or at least just have a system where, you can't see anything and your opponents can't see anything. That would be fine. I mean, you've got things like you can't see people through walls, so you can have those kinds of aspects, so maybe you could have something tied to the lighting with the vision of the opponents as well. I don't know how it would be scripted, but it's worth a try. Or, like I say, the simpler option, just add a bit more lighting to the area. It can get a bit boring unless the video is going in the background as well. The scene's rather cozy. Huh, really? I always thought that the living room was a bit boring. I mean, it's one of those things, I haven't seen that many people watching all of my videos. I remember I did a thing, I was going to try a season of, would this be good as a weapon in a zombie apocalypse? And frankly, those videos did abysmally. It's been about half a year, and there's still only about, 20 or 30 views. Now, granted, I didn't have as good lighting and didn't have it all as well done back then as maybe I do these days, but interesting. But yeah, I'm hoping maybe I can do something else. One of the things I was hoping to do with the green screen is do more of what I'm talking about, like, say, swinging swords and knives around. Maybe I'm talking about sickles, so I'll swing a sickle around and then have that on a green screen and then sort of talk about it in front and point around and do that stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you guys are okay with just having that living room scene, then I'm happy to keep doing various scenes and, various information and videos in that setting. And with the weather, if it's not like what you're seeing on that loop video with the rain, then hopefully I can maybe get some outdoor stuff done as well. It's like with when I was doing that test cutting experiments video. It was quite enjoyable doing that. Or when I did the armoured chores, I went outside. I couldn't wear brigandine out in the hot sun, but it was still pretty fun in male armour mowing the lawn. I just wondered if I could maybe do another series. I don't know if you guys would ever want to see doing other stuff in armour, but I guess I don't really have that much in terms of armour. Depends. Sometimes I wonder what you guys prefer in terms of videos. I mean, I sometimes do stuff like reviews, such as of my Rick Enye sword, certain bits of armour, things like that. Or whether you guys prefer the sort of HEMA topics, how to fight with this sort of weapon. In fact, let's try to do a collaborative video. Sponsored on YouTube. Yes, that's a good idea. One of the people who's been most helpful and most sort of involved with me is actually this guy on a channel. I'd recommend him, who's called Gym Giant. Now, you might think I'm a bit fat and slobbish and, not very good in terms of fitness. He's basically the opposite. He's always doing these strongman competitions. He's constantly doing exercise and does videos about protein stuff and all sorts. So yeah, I'm sort of collaborating with him now. Over this month, I've been doing exercise. In fact, let's do some exercise now. Where are my weights? Oh, it's right behind me. But yeah, I was doing that sort of collaboration. It was on this place called VidMe, which is a bit like YouTube, and he did a challenge called Fit Me, where we just improve an aspect of our fitness over the next month. So that's not over yet, and I'm just doing that for now. I did a single video, I'm just going to do a second one at the end. But one of the most hopeful ones, in terms of collaborations, is with someone called Adam Chapman. Now, you've probably not heard of the channel. He's got one called Ada Meme. He likes memes and birds and stuff like that, but he's looking at doing stuff like a visual novel. He said he's going to pay me money. Oh yes, finally some income to give information and expertise to help out with the visual novel. In the same way, I guess, as they're hiring HEMA people for Kingdom Come Deliverance we discussed earlier. But he's also developing a game which is a sort of fan response to Undertale, which is called, well, not so creatively, but it'll do, Overtale. And he actually did a motion capture session with people like myself and others from my club, where we were showing HEMA techniques and sort of, there'd be person X does this strike, and person Y does, this parry and riposte in kind of an animated set piece. So it's turn-based combat, a bit like the original Undertale, and apparently we'll have the same sort of bullet hell type of stuff, so a mini-game to determine how successful your attack and defense was, as opposed to random numbers doing it all for you. And then the end result would be a set animation, so it would be person X does a fendente, that sort of diagonal cut to chop my head off. And then I, person Y, will then do a sloping parry and riposte with a similar attack, and cleave him into him, or whatever. That sort of thing. And he's mentioning, he wanted me to come over to around where he is to sort of do stuff like training with HEMA. And I was asking him and, discussing further about coming over and maybe teaching him and doing basically the same kind of thing I did with my PC Genie teaches Flyboy Puri, dagger and sword stuff. Showing some basic techniques, core concepts and things that are needed in sort of lesson style, going from the knowledge that I have. And then he, of course, would be learning, and it would be all on camera, so he learns, which is good for the stuff he's developing, and it'd be good for me because I can be showing all of you guys the techniques as if you were there in his place, I guess. I don't know what you guys thought of the videos. I know it was a bit poor in terms of lighting because it was towards the evening and he was about to be going home. But I thought it was quite good in terms of what I was able to do. And I'm hoping to do more techniques in the future with specific techniques, because I've wanted to do a lot of teaching videos from what I learned, not wanting to go too far into the stuff I don't know and I'm not confident with yet, but core concepts and basics, and actually do lesson videos. But the reason I haven't been doing it, apart from stuff like my Fiore stances video, is just simply because it needs a second person. I can try to tell you, like I've done earlier, about how an exchange of thrusts works, but really you've got to actually see it happen. You've got to have two people, me doing how the technique works and the opponent doing that. And then of course maybe have a time to show how they're maybe learning that technique themselves from scratch and maybe asking me questions I didn't think to answer, about particulars, or maybe this bit about the footwork, or is it this way round or that way round stuff, and all of that. So yeah, hopefully I can go around to his place and I can do that collaboration video as well, so plenty of opportunities. Any particular sort of subjects that you guys want covered? I do wonder sometimes, what exact types of videos you guys prefer. I'm waiting for the next question to come up. In terms of specifics, there are certain things I've learnt from the treatises from people like Fiore de la Berry, most especially, that can easily be worked out into drills. and with a second person like Adam or another person, perhaps Ryan, Flyboy Fury again, I can do those techniques, and having a live person to demonstrate it with, that should allow me to actually show you how it works. Huh. Yeah, that's an interesting of the dual shields video. I'll be honest, I have been sort of acting a bit like a vulture, a scavenger. Yeah. What happened was, I was starting to dry up with content. I was not really knowing what people wanted, and no one was really commenting much on my channel. Let's be honest, I'm a small channel, I don't get much attention. So I was looking at other people's videos. I like watching stuff like Scaligrim's videos, and Lindy Beige sometimes, and Scholar Gladiatoria, stuff like that. And I was actually looking, and people were requesting stuff from them, and I thought I'll just give it, myself. And that was one example. People were asking about, what if you use 2 shields in combat? That was asked of Scholar on the Scholar Gladiatoria channel, and I thought, you know what, I'll give them what they want myself, even though nobody's actually gone and watched it really. It's one of the things I'd like. I mean, again, the whole idea of the PC Genie, it's that idea of people want certain things done, and although I'll of course go on certain tangents and topics that I like to talk about sometimes, for the most part I want to see what the people want in terms of lessons and things like subjects. So things like you mentioned there, Oucha, the show and tell videos and reviews, stuff like that, and then I can get those done. But yeah, if you like that type of video, one thing I can review that should be coming up is my fencing jacket that I got. It's not really a proper padded jacket, and it's from Spez, and it's only 350 newtons. If you've watched my more recent videos, it's the red jacket you keep seeing me using. Excuse me. It's an interesting one, and I'll certainly give a review, because I went to the main melee and I had a chance to test it properly against people smacking me to bits with weapons, so I know just how well it performs and its limitations and whatnot now, as opposed to just... I thought of doing a first impressions video, but I don't really like it. It's like a review, and people take that, as a sort of review, but you don't really know what you're talking about. You don't know exactly how well it performs, whereas now I've had some proper field testing of it. Much happier now. Except for the fact that I've got quite a nasty couple of injuries around my right arm. Whacked just in front of the elbow on my forearm on my right arm, and I've still got a bit of weird, sometimes stinging pain if I poke it on my bone just behind the knuckle of the thumb. It's from people whacking me, so yeah. Red Dragon gauntlets. It's the fencing jacket. They're alright, but against very strong people smacking you as hard as they can, it's not quite the best. And I paid the price. Luckily I haven't broken anything or got any serious injuries, but it was certainly still quite the recoiling hit, suffice it to say. I mean, are there any particular things that have been on your, the minds of you guys that you've been wanting me to discuss about, sort of sword fighting or knights or whatnot? Like you asked earlier about who would win out of a samurai, knight or Viking. Have there been any other sort of burning questions on your minds, perhaps? Or heck, anything about myself, perhaps? So I've done videos about my Asperger's syndrome and stuff like that, but I didn't know how much people wanted to hear more about those sorts of aspects of my life, or whether they'd rather I stick to, sword fighting and that kind of stuff. Around the moment. Huh, 3 of you guys. Alright, just checking. Just making sure I'm not talking to the air. How do you defeat a dragon? Well, first things first, probably not with a sword. Dragons, obviously they come in folklore with different designs, and then there's stuff like the difference between, and remember when I was researching for my video on furries, I found out there's all sorts of differences between the Eastern dragons and the Western dragons, and it seems the Western dragons are more flying types, whereas the Eastern ones are kind of more like lizards? No, not like lizards. Hard to explain, kind of, you know, more ground-based with lots of legs like caterpillars and stuff. I don't know. But in general, obviously, if you've got something that can fly around like a bird, then projectile weapons like bows and crossbows are going to really help to do the trick. Now, one of the things I would consider, if you've got a type of dragon, I remembered this when I was playing on the Lord of the Rings sort of real-time strategy game on the Xbox, and sometimes you'd have these sort of Nazgul on these, I forgot what they're called, things that are a bit like dragons but look much uglier, that would swoop down at you. And I thought, actually, if you have got a creature that does act like a hawk, you know, in the sense that this dragon doesn't just breathe fire at you from a range, in which case, you know, meet range of range by shooting it out of the air with a bow or crossbow or ballista or something, then if you've got the type of dragon that's going to swoop down to try and catch you, to be honest, the best thing to do is to have a pike formation, you know? I mean, if you've got a dragon that's swooping down and maybe for half a second opportunity, they're going to be swooping down and trying to catch you, you could try to gut it open with a swing of a sword, but maybe you don't react in time, you know? Whereas, if you've got a spear, all you need to do is plant it in the ground next to your foot or something, point it in the direction of the dragon, and as soon as he or she swoops down to try and catch you, they get skewered. And it's something that I mentioned in my video about using weapons to defeat wild beasts as well. If you can stick out a sharp pointy spear at, you know, this creature that's trying to charge towards you, then it's best to skewer it at a range rather than rely on something like a sword or dagger to stick it up close. Whereas those sorts of sidearms like daggers and swords should be more last resort items. I do wonder about armour, because against something like a dragon, of course, if they are going to do breathing fire, then it's going to start heating up things like metal armour more. But to be honest, I think it's still better to have, you know, plate armour that's heating up around you and is going to start scalding you eventually, but at least having it act as a heat sink, you know, that idea where it's spreading the heat all around and conducts it, instead of just your skin getting directly burnt like you've just put your hand on the stove kind of thing. I think armour would still help at least a bit against a dragon's fire, so I would probably have, you know, end up recommending good armour. Things like padded armour, that's something I notice about things like the fire service. It's obviously good to have plenty of coverage, same as against arrows and such. So if you've just got maybe helmets and such, it's not going to be very good. Whereas if you've got things like gambesons, padded maybe trousers, mail armour head to toe, and a helmet, preferably full face, the more coverage you get, the less area the fire might contact. And probably by the time you've got, you know, things like just short visors, then you can maybe not even have to worry so much about the breathing holes in your eye slits anymore, because for the most part the fire is just going to touch the helmet as opposed to get anything sensitive. But yeah, generally for close combat, definitely spears and other pole arms like maybe bills and glaives, and then for projectile combat, definitely something fast like a bow. Crossbow, maybe. If you're preparing a defense, like let's say on a wall and a dragon's going to come over, maybe if you prepared a siege-style crossbow in advance, and then you can just pop out of the wall and twang, that's good. Similar thing with maybe a ballista, but if you're suddenly encountering a dragon, it's best to have a bow so you can knock, draw, and loose many arrows, because a fast-flying creature, what's your general accuracy? If you miss a few times with bow, you should at least maybe a couple of shots a minute hit the dragon. Whereas with a crossbow, you're spending most of the time with that windlass to, you know, get a powerful enough crossbow cranked, and then you get one shot. And the same thing applies to early firearms as well. You know, if you've got that firearm loaded, and then you fire it off, boom! Ah, I missed. Oops. That's my one shot gone and perhaps get killed. Although, saying that, if you're looking later, at say the 1800s, perhaps that would be a good design, having a musket, because I mentioned, of course, if a dragon swooping down have a spear, well, a long musket with a bayonet is like a spear, so that can work, and then you've also got a projectile weapon combined into the same thing, so a musket perhaps is pretty good against dragons, because you can then, even if it takes some time, and it might be better to have something rifled, which they did have in the later Napoleonic types of rifles, have that sort of thing going on. So then you can shoot with your projectile weapon, try and make pot shots at the dragon or catch it on the way down, and then something like a bayonet as an improvised spear to skewer it if it tries to eat you or swoop down and grab you or something. But perhaps beyond that, I'd probably see specially designed equipment. You get certain things like siege bells, which were these sort of wooden frames covered in leather. You'd have some people, maybe sappers and people undermining the walls of a castle and stuff like that, or maybe igniting some wooden gates or something. And they'd be sat in this bell, so they had these weird types of equipment for specialist purposes. And I imagine you could do something like that and have some kind of spiked bell or something, again against a swooping dragon. Have something like that, so then it's covered in soaked leather like a siege tower would, so then if they try to burn it, it'll just boil the water on the leather, and it won't burn the person inside. Maybe get a bit hot, but nothing dangerous. And then have spikes, so if they want to try and snatch that siege bell item from under you, then they get skewered. You know, they'll just have spikes all over, and it'd be like laying tacks on the floor for horses to stamp on, and ow. Speaking of gunpowder, who do you think would win a 15th century battlefield? An archer, a crossbowman, or a handgunner? Well, it does come down to things like individual experience and armour, but if we assume that the same armour is being used, then for the most part it's interesting. Crossbowmen, if we're talking about none of them have armour, or if none of them have any shields and have the same amount of armour, then I would give it to the archer, because the archer can knock, draw and loose. They can do it pretty accurately when they're, yeah, indeed, considering having poundage caliber weapons, so they'd be able to do pretty well against each other in terms of, I mean, for an archer or crossbowman, really, with things like armour, none of those would really pierce the armour unless it's stuff like gauntlets and thinner plates. Stuff like thick breastplates and helmets would be, they're even called bullet-proof, and that was back in the times like around the 1600s. Later you'd have these items actively tested against arquebus and handgun bullets to make sure they are resilient. But really an arrow, a crossbow bolt, or a bullet wouldn't really pierce the thickest of armour, so they've both got to hit the same kind of gaps in the armour, or bits like the hands and feet where it's thinner plates, or even things like, you know, in the eye sockets and places like that. Apart from that, the crossbowman often would have a pavis. Now that is an interesting wild card. If the archer is against a crossbowman who doesn't have a shield or anything stuck in front of them, then the archer can just knock, draw and loose pretty quickly, go twang, twang, twang. They can maybe miss a few times, they can hit, they can keep shooting until that person's dead, much faster than the crossbowman, for a similar degree of accuracy and reliability. The handgunner, I mean, they're very poor accuracy, they take a very long time to reload, and like I said, they don't pierce armour, so they don't have any specific advantage over an archer or crossbowman, except the loud weapon might scare them away. But when you've got a pavis, which is a tall shield, if you know what a scutum is, like a Roman legionary would use, a pavis is a bit like that, but it's even bigger, and you'd plant it in the ground. It's a deployable defence. You'd stick in the ground in front of you. Now when that's involved, I give it to the crossbowman, because the crossbowman shooting at range can have all the time they need now, despite their slow knocking process. They've got to maybe use a windlass or cranaquin. Let's wind it up. 5 minutes later. Okay, that's ready. Pop in a quarrel in there. Twang! And that's fine. Whereas the archer is out and exposed in the open. So, with the Pavis, the crossbowman, I'd say, gets the best advantage. Without a Pavis and on equal shield terms, or armour terms and whatnot, then I'd give it to the archer. Again, this is assuming they've all got equal training and whatnot, of course. It's always worth noting that one of the reasons why a crossbowman or handgunner would be, preferred over each other would be because archers take a long time to train. And that's why they had things like the laws in England. So you could just have them trained in stuff like close combat instead of training them in archery. Are you known of the quote, winner's right? I don't know if you mean known? I've never said that before, so I'm certainly not, if you mean known with the quote, as in I'm actually famous for saying it, that wouldn't be me. But, am I down with the quote, winner's right history? If you mean am I down, if I'm generally in agreement with the quote, winner's right history, then yeah. It's an interesting situation where, for example, the Romans, they got a pretty nice lot in life when it comes to the history books, and a lot of stereotypes as well are written by winners. The Anglo-Saxons and people like that who, defeated the Vikings, did that sort of thing, were the winners who allowed writings by people like monks to go down and, they say stupid stuff like the Vikings were just these evil satanic people who wore horns on their helmets and are the devil incarnate and slay them all, don't worry buddies. And that of course went down in history. Excuse me. And like I say, the Romans have described these barbarians, and even when if you look at the Total War series, that is definitely a good example of winners right history. Because if you look at stuff like Rome on Rome 2, Total War, it's basically what the Romans wrote personified. If you look at the barbarians, even with their voices, it's completely... That's one of the reasons why I can't take the games quite so seriously sometimes, because they've got these barbarians and they're going, okay, we'll have your women, and we'll loot everything, and we'll drink beer until we're under the table. And then they'll have, they'll go shirtless and scream and throw heads around and do all kinds of stuff, as opposed to being these sophisticated cultures. Whereas the Romans are portrayed as this professional... I mean, obviously there's a degree of truth in the trope. The Romans were better organised, they learnt from the people they defeated and adapted their techniques, so they were indeed superior. That's why they had better ideas of what armour and weapons to use and things like that. But when it comes to things like the culture and whatnot, they really hit it hard on, these guys are barbarians, they're just disgusting, wretched, filth, and they should just all be slain or enslaved. Which is an interesting one. People got mentioned about slavery. Of course, there's quite a lot of bad stuff going on with regards to, the British Empire having these black slaves from Africa. And they go, oh, very evil people. And yeah, I agree, it was very evil. They're enslaving people. But then you got the Romans. Look at them. They're so cool. They enslaved the barbarians with ease. What? Two-faced? Anyway, cool. I wouldn't say I know a lot about Romans, but you know something about the Malta Knights? I don't know much about the Malta Knights specifically. I remember watching a documentary about, I think it was some people like the Turks trying to... I think they had a sort of, their main fort was being attacked by some people, Muslims from the Middle East trying to expand. Typical sort of scenario, empires trying to expand from Europe, from the Middle East, from wherever. Whoever's successful wants even more power, sort of thing. And apparently there was a long siege going on. And actually, it was an interesting program I watched because one of the focuses was on how the Malta Knights had, I think it was Malta anyway, the Knights there had defended against the attackers. So you had things like these, I'd call them hula hoops of death. They had these hoops, I think they were just bands of iron, and they had this sort of cloth and pitch. Pitch being this sort of tar-like substance, a bit like crude oil, I guess. You'd have around, which is made from tree sap, I think, boiling tree sap. And you'd have that soaked in there, and they'd ignite it, and the amount it would kill anyone is debatable, but it was certainly intimidating having these rings of fire, like something out of a Michael Bay movie or something, just rolling down the hills trying to catch these Muslims, and of course people screaming and running away. Good, that keeps them away from the walls, and just having various traps like that. One of the things I do like about, I mean, if I was in a siege warfare, you know, there was stuff going on with the attackers and defenders having equal odds, I would personally perform best as a defender, because you can just be so cruel as a defender, you know, whether you're in Malta or in somewhere else in, well, somewhere in Europe, you can just do all these things. Like there was these treatises with these things called, what's it called? It's not a lobster, it's a crayfish. That was it. The thing's called crayfish, which would go on these little pulleys and winches, which would have these sharp bits on them, so as they go across you can't charge because you've got to step over them really carefully, so charging men and horses would just get skewered if they're not careful. And then they were loaded with these explosive charges on fuses, so they would light the fuse, it would go onto these little crayfish on wheels, metal crayfish in the middle of a gatehouse, and then boom, it would explode with steel shot, a bit like, you know, a standard great, you know, sort of standard grenade, basically, early style thing, you know, shrapnel grenade, except these little rolling things there, and then you'd have sort of gaps in the gatehouses so you could pour boiling water, or better still, boiling oil onto people. I mentioned earlier there were those flaming hoops you could throw down and roll down the hills. You can basically let out your inner masochist. If you guys have ever watched Home Alone, imagine that, but without the PG rating, and on an industrial scale, you know? Yes, be as cruel as you want. I'm talking about a flat earth. It seems like Malta Knights and Jesuits rule our world. These medieval people with crazy rituals still exist. Yeah, actually that's a fair point. I don't know if that's where you wanted to go, but I'll mention it anyway. It's embarrassing really. I personally am myself a Protestant Christian, which actually is starting to die out here in Britain. You have indeed got all these crazy people who indeed still think the earth is flat, and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that, and just do things like they refuse medicine and various factors like that. But to be honest, it's not necessarily representative of, you know, the Christians as a whole. You've got to bear in mind, this is another thing about winners are writing history. Well, the atheists seem to be winning the media at the moment, because if you ever look at anything representing medieval society, normally you've got these, first you've got kiddie fiddler priests. That's a bit of a dead trope, really. You've got things like, you know, people who are Christian but are sort of wanting to be these economists and just using people's faith to make money, which is sort of, it's true of medieval certain rulers of institutions, especially early popes. I don't want to say, you know, I don't want to say anything bad about popes in general, but you know, it's a fact that there were people who'd make these fake, you know, blood of certain saints, which turned out to be duck's blood, and, you know, bones of apparent of learning, which were founded by Christians. So it's one of those, you know, two sides of the same coin things. The way I'd say, basically to summarise it, is, you know, when it comes to people who are atheist or Christian or Muslim or Sikh, they're all basically, you know, there are good people and bad people amongst them all. I've met some people who were, you know, of those different places. I'd say I've met at least some of each. I've met people who were atheistic, who were really nice, and, you know, actually people I get along with. My best friend Ryan's one of them. He's either some sort of agnostic or an atheist, and there are other people who actually are definitely atheist, who I get along with fine. They're nice people. They're fine with rational discourse as opposed to screaming at you. They have lovely conversations, you know, and you can be proper friends with them. But I've also met people who were aggressively so. You know, you've got whatever stereotypes are attributed to street preachers. I've met people who were literally that in atheist example, you know, and of course I met street preachers of Christianity. I actually, at this time, I was in Exeter, which is my nearest city in Devon, and I was going around and I actually met one of these street preacher people, and I was hearing him sort of say, "Oh, you're all going to hell." So I made a point to go around fairly near to him, and of course started going along the same lines. You can be saved, and then that was my opportunity. By the way, that's obviously not God telling you I'm going to hell, because I'm a fellow Christian. Okay, he didn't really react to my, I must change my life around, but food for thought. I've seen an educated and researched video into medieval ignorance. The earth was flat, no one bathed in it. Everyone was a fanatic. That's an interesting one, because it's hard to tell how much there was ignorance or how much there was enlightenment in medieval period. You can see that educated people across the world were such and were not ignorant. So, for example, people in educated circles knew the world was around since classical era, so we're talking BC times. But I mean, you've got. I'll get on to that next question in a minute. But I can say that medieval people, the educated ones, were fairly up to date on their knowledge. They had some ideas about chemistry, even if they were sometimes trying a bit sillily to pursue the true alchemy, making lead and other such common items into gold. Stupid, but they were just trying. That was their goal, a bit like curing cancer. But they certainly were educated. But I can't speak on behalf of the commoners. Maybe the commoners were a bit like modern humans, in that you've got people who they're not expert scientists, but people like you and me, they kind of have a slight working knowledge, sort of related to what true scientists know about things like chemicals, about bacteria. Maybe in a similar way, medieval commoners also knew the world was round rather than flat and stuff like that. In the same way as the properly educated knew, just by sort of the information dissolving down. But we'll never know, because they couldn't write down their thoughts. Now, do you have doubts about history and what you've learnt at school? Yes, I do. There are definitely doubts. In fact, even since school, I have already found facts, well, quote, facts, unquote, that I have disproved. You get, well, not personally disproved, but have seen being disproved in my time. So it's that situation. There are things like, I'll say, like I said earlier, the Romans. They're all considered to be so, they were so amazing and so cultured, but really, they were slavers. You've got this really sort of two-faced, you see these in the British Empire? They had slaves. They're evil. Here are these Romans. They had slaves, but were they cool for how good they were with slaves? What? So even then, just hearing these things, I had my doubts. And you can see it these days as well. It's one of those things we've got to take what you hear with a pinch of salt. Even from people who try their best with history, like me. I can be wrong sometimes, I'll admit. We try our best, but you get sometimes these ignorant publications. One of them came up fairly recently. You get the usual kind of lists. I hate list videos. Top 10 ways you can die. Top 10 amazing facts you never knew about Britain. Or, in this case, 10 or 10, 25, whatever. Things that are really disturbing about being knights. And it was really embarrassing. And I think people like Metatron and the others did debunking videos. And you had people like MatPat's video. I don't know if Roy, if you looked at the earlier conversation about when we were discussing who would win out of a samurai, knight, or Viking. But in the game theory video about who would win out of a knight, samurai, or Viking, the reason there were so many debunking videos was it was just so wrong. So, I mean, you've got to bear in mind it's not even like, there's history and stuff you've learnt, and then people improve and the knowledge gets better. It seems always got, people learning the correct things, and then we know stuff like knight armor is not so heavy you need a crane to winch you onto a horse. There are records of people who got onto horses and even tried to do things like climb mountains and do all sorts of crazy stuff in armor, and yet there'll still be these top 10 amazing things you didn't know about knights. Did you know that knights had to be winched by cranes onto their horses? You what, mate? That's wrong. You know, you have to. So there are a lot of inaccuracies all the time. And you think that's interesting. You think dinosaurs never lived? Yeah, how do they have? Well, it's crazy that how do they have sex? I mean, with regards to that last point, I think they'd probably be a bit like mammals. You never know. But just that in documentaries they'd have dinosaurs without the naughty bits, so kids can watch it and not see dinosaurs having a bang and a 69 and all that stuff going on. Can't believe I'm saying that. Anyway, but I do wonder if there was perhaps some sort of stage cycle, or perhaps if there were dinosaurs or something similar, in-betweens around when humans are around. Because it seems like, I don't know how accurate carbon dating is, because if you look at something that is guaranteed 150 years old, look at it, it says it's about 150 years old, you go, yeah, this carbon dating system is accurate. But then, excuse me, that's 150 years. If you're trying to go back what you say are millions, let's not put a too fine, well, let's not, let that slide by. Millions of years, and you've only got scales with known history on on smaller scales, like to the 1600s or to maybe 200 AD or something, and after that it starts to get into, we think it's sort of around that time, then the scale is definitely going to have some inaccuracy, because you just can't get a good enough measure without having something exact and dated, and actually, it's very old, and dating it to the exact time. So yeah, I don't know how accurate that is. This is and But yeah, to be honest, when it comes to things like dinosaurs, because I don't really know much about biology besides, the kind of stuff you learn in school, I probably wouldn't be qualified to comment on that, to be honest. I could say, well, try to think of theories, but I'd be spending a lot of time when I don't really know that much about them. So my best knowledge of history is generally around stuff like, historical combat and stuff like that, because I can experiment with it. I haven't exactly been experimenting by getting dinos and lizards to breed. Have I ever played Dungeons and Dragons or a similar tabletop RPG? Sort of. I've never actually done them as tabletop RPGs, but I have played things like Baldur's Gate and quite a few different weird, sort of games on the computer. So I've played games with the systems. I mean, Baldur's Gate goes from the, I can't remember which edition rules of Dungeons and Dragons, but you've got all of the core aspects, the die rolls, the saving throws and the rest, and I played those. I found it okay, but it wasn't amazing to me. The main thing was, of course, get to have techniques and skill. I hate gambling. Not to say, apart from the ethics, I actually hate this. I feel every time I leave something to a die roll, you've got a 20-sided die, and every time I want something to happen, the opposite is going to happen. I seem to be, it's like in Fallout, if any of you guys remember the special system, you got strength, perception, endurance, charisma, intelligence, agility, luck. Now, call it arrogant, I usually give myself a high intelligence score, but also, definitely much truer of my life, I always give myself luck 1, because every time I seem to leave anything to chance, or don't control it as a factor, maybe it's because I'm autistic and I'm a control freak or something, but I feel that every time I leave something to chance, it goes wrong. I think, okay, roll the slot machine. Ding, ding, ding. You lose. So I don't like it. That's why I'm not that keen on things like Dungeons and Dragons. There's too much of a luck involved. Obviously, you can have things like a high score on an attribute that gives your boost to a die roll, so that it pushes the odds in your favour, but there's still that dependence on having a high or low roll causing things to happen to you. Now, Roy, in regards to RuneScape, I'm pretty much like you. I used to play RuneScape way too much. In fact, it was quite annoying. I had my account deleted because of alleged botting. It was around the time when they were purging a lot of players, and I didn't find out until it was too late. I was sort of playing more intermittently, but I had an account that was 10 years old. I played it since I was 13, so in fact, by now, yeah, I mean, it'd be 11 years old, my account, because it was just shortly after my birthday when I started the membership and whatnot on RuneScape. So, yeah, I liked it. And I had all these items, like I liked what they did on RuneScape. Obviously, the actual fighting and stuff is totally unrealistic and it's all silly and fantasy, but, you know, having stuff like the quests with their cool little stories, it was fun. I remember this one quest, right, where you have this genie, not me, a different genie, who was saying, I want, so, you know, we need to get something solved, I don't know, help the crops grow or something. Something bad was happening and we needed to get it solved. So I found this genie, so he said, so you know the guy who is the mayor of the town? Yes. Woosa. Yep, I know that guy. So what do you want done? Do you want a favour? Yes. I want his soul. Oh no. I need his soul. So, gears are grinding. What am I going to do? I talk to the guy, you know, he says, I'm not going to die. I don't want to give my soul to this guy. I go, what can I do? So what did I do? I took a wusser's shoes, got a knife out, cut the bottoms off, go back to the genie. Here's a wusser's soul. Brilliant. So yeah, I mean, it was moments like that that really made RuneScape such a brilliant game to play. You know, you have these serious moments in story that were quite good, nice, good bit of storytelling. You had these hilarious moments like there with a wusser's soul and various things like that, and it was good playing with friends on there and doing skills and, you know, having a good bit of a time. But yeah, I was disillusioned by. I'm not really that happy with the attitude that Jagex have, to be honest, because apart from the fact that I was kicked from RuneScape, I got back on to sort of play around and experiment in a free account, and I noticed they had some really arrogant stuff going on. Bearing in mind I wasn't the only person whose account was purged, and apparently one of the only accounts that was restored was after a lot of people. It was this famous kind of, you know, bit like you have famous game players of Minecraft. It was a person who was famous on RuneScape, and their account got wrongly banned, and people were campaigning and saying, hey, look, you know, this person did no wrong, and that person's account got restored because Jagex caved in. But apart from that, for the most part, everybody's accounts who was, you know, automatically targeted as this is bad getting banned, they never got it back. And then I go back in, and you've got these announcers who are there. Basically, they're there. You get these NPCs who, in their own way, which is kind of cool. You've got people like people giving information to new guys, and they're there as NPCs dedicated to it. So they had one for this announcer for, you know, the bot. Let's talk about the bot finder general. Yes, but it got extremely annoying, and it got really, really arrogant when they literally said, and I quote, and he's never wrong, or something like the bot finder general is never wrong. And that's just the attitude that killed it for me, because they definitely knew that at least a few people had been wrongly banned, and yet they had the gall to go around to these players, including myself, who'd had their accounts wrongly banned, to just go around and say, oh, and the person who's using some stupid automated bot, you know, or automated system, not even manually checking over footage, but just automatic systems that kicked players and banned them permanently, including people with a lot of memories and, you know, certain unique items and stuff from annual events, the Easter and December, you know, Christmas events, stuff like that. For example, I had this thing called the Windtumber tree you can put in your house, and these things which are unique and were special and they were, you know, I went from a clean slate, completely removed, and they had the gall to go around and say that they're never wrong about this automated software that clearly was wrong. That attitude, I think, you know, I'm not paying money to people who act like that, go around wrongly banning people and wrongly doing things, and then pretending like they're never wrong. It's just too arrogant, you know. Sorry to sour it for you. I mean, yeah, the actual physical game itself was brilliant, and it was so much fun. You know, making items and having sales, and although you get some people who say on stuff like YouTube, you know, oh, these new features, I hate it. Oh, what happened to the good old days? RuneScape, I consistently felt like, yeah, there were automated bans. It was around sometime like 2015 or so, sometime like that. But anyway, where was I? Oh yes, I consistently felt that the updates that happened to RuneScape were really good. You know, they brought stuff like previously people would go trading, you know, in text messages, trading Abyssal Whip 2 million or whatever, whereas they had this thing called the what was it called, the Trading Emporium or something. I can't remember what it's called now, but they had this basically a bit like RuneScape eBay, a place where you could sell your items and buy them and do all of that. Alright, or is it just past midnight in yours? Okay, well, good night, Roy. Actually, it's half to midnight on my channel, and my end in Britain as well, so I know how you feel. But yeah, see you next time. I'll probably run another live questions and answers at some point, perhaps during the week or around next Sunday or something. Anyway, yeah, I like how sometimes you get places that listen to the community that bring out lots of updates and developments that are really good. They're doing stuff like that in Exanima. Hopefully they'll be like that when it comes to, you know, Kingdom Come, Deliverance, and on things like RuneScape it went well. Because sometimes you get people who they do what they think is right, you know, what they think will make a game or feature better, and they just kind of go ahead of it despite what people are asking for. Whereas here, with games like RuneScape, they were showing, you know, nice updates and developments that help. And as much as I do like on games like Kingdom Come, Deliverance, and Exanima, I like the actual fighting, one of the things that keeps these games going so well is how they listen to the communities. And if they don't listen to the communities and things stagnate, then eventually you will inevitably get bored or even frustrated with the game. Or with the particular app or feature that you're using. Actually, which is showing with people getting quite frustrated with YouTube, with the features that have been changing in ways they don't like, with, you know, the advertising revenue going awry. I don't want to go around, I'm not here to do yet another video hating on YouTube, you know, and saying they're horrible. They do try, but, you know, it is causing a lot of people to move over to places like VidMe. And to be honest, it's thanks to that lack of funding. I hate to ask on video, but I mean, I've got a Patreon account, and, you know, I mean, I'm making, well, next to no money at the moment, except from odd jobs and things, so to help keep me going and allow me to buy new things for the channel, it would help if I was able to have some sort of monthly income, even if it's just a few pounds a month, you know, maybe £1 a month from each of you. Have you heard of Nidhogg? 2D competitive fencing platformer game. No, to be honest, I have never heard of Nidhogg. I'll have a look. One of the things that I'd seen more recently that was 2D in terms of fencing was by this person who's actually subscribed to my channel. He's called Stavsubak or something like that. Might do a review, but he was developing a Flash game which is based on German sword fighting. I liked the concept. It's based on real swordsmanship. Oh, you want the link to Patreon? Yeah, but as I was saying, what was I saying? Good grief. I don't know. Patreon. Ah, yes, here we are. So, here. yeah, but yeah, basically it's patreon.com/PC_Genie. So yeah, I'm there and it says, PC Genie is creating videos, but I've posted links to my videos and stuff like that on there. I've not put a paywall present. I've decided not at the moment to have any videos that are exclusive to Patreon, subscribers, and give any particular exclusive benefits, because to be honest, I don't really have a standpoint. I could say, oh yes, I will grant the wishes of those who are on my Patreon account and whatnot, but let's be honest, I need the wishes. I just need people in general to ask me for videos to create just at any time. So it's, there are no perks or anything, but obviously the more money I get through areas like Patreon, the more I can invest into my channel. And when I get money through general sources, I think, I want to put it in my savings account. I'm hoping to save up towards a house. But if I'm getting money from my YouTube subscribers, I want to, of course, invest. It's about like the parable of the talents, which is that if you don't read the Bible, that's fine. It's the concept, basically, that if you're trusted with money by someone, you should try to invest it and make even more money. And in the idea of wanting to, quote, profit, unquote, from my YouTube, of course, I'm wanting to, if I am getting money from people through Patreon, then in order to have people like the content and keep wanting to put money into Patreon or want to put more money, then I'm actively invested in making my videos better. Plus, I can physically make my videos better anyway. I can buy equipment I couldn't afford before. I can get, special, get weapons and armor. I can get stuff like recording equipment. One example is I have wanted to do a wish, which is the only wish I have never granted yet, of the comments and things from videos, and that was someone about a year ago now asked me to do a video on the Anglo-Saxons, around people like around the 1066 Battle of Hastings kind of thing, that sort of culture of Britain England, not Britain, England in the early sort of 700s to 1000s kind of era. And I wanted to do the video, but I felt like I couldn't really do it because I didn't really have enough working knowledge on polearms in general, but I didn't have a spear. And as far as I'm concerned, you can't do a video about the Anglo-Saxons without having without featuring a spear. If I'm talking about knights, I want to have a sword and maybe some mail armor, things like that. If I want to talk about an archer, I've got my English longbow. If I want to talk about an Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon beards and thanes and those people, I need a spear. So that's one of the things I'd want to buy for my channel, to have an actual polearm. And of course I'd want to do stuff like test cutting, see if I can slice with that spear, how effective it'd be, how easy I can do things like thrusts, and stab through bottles and do stuff like that, but also of course show techniques as well. So hence things like Patreon. So yes, let's see if I've got the link like I said earlier. So yeah, PC_Genie. Okay. Patreon. There we are. .com/PC_Genie. There we go. Right, but yeah, basically, with the funding, I'm hoping to get more. Ooh, earn a few bucks a month to put your Patreon and social. Yes, that's a fair point. I have to admit, I've always felt a bit iffy about using plastering social media everywhere, even though I conversely plaster all my YouTube videos on social media. But I've seen some videos, and I've been there, I was scrolling through looking at stuff I might want to see, and I see, you get the description when you're on the search page, and it kind of gives a general idea of the video. It's like when I describe the video, can you use bows in close combat? And I have a look at whether longbows, flatbows, etc. can be used in close combat, and what advantages, disadvantages they have, blah 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 blah, and then have the social links afterwards. Except I've mostly just had seen my channel, but I kept constantly seeing all these channels, especially very new channels. Oh, those young whippersnappers. But you know, all these channels that had, here's my video. Okay, I want to see a bit more. I don't want to commit to that click yet, because I know that's what you want. Bad guy. Cynical me. And paranoid me, perhaps. And then I'd see in a description it's just nothing but social links, and I think, so it's not really a description anymore, is it? You haven't described anything except what your social crap is. But yeah, I suppose I'll put some things like Facebook and Twitter information on there. But pretty much you're looking for, well, I suppose the Facebook one's unusual because I've actually, PC Genie has taken, I've used my initials PC Genie JJG for my actual self. So I've ended up having to have a thing that's called PC Genie's YouTube, which is a bit long to have as a hyperlink. So yeah, I'll put that in probably on video descriptions. So that's a good idea, Routshire. Apart from that, my Twitter's pretty easy. It's usual kind of PC_Genie. So I'll add those links as well. I don't really use all sorts of social media. In fact, I only just today, a couple of hours before starting this video, went up onto Reddit. I knew about Reddit articles and had read it a bit, hey, but I never actually had an account and properly involved myself in the community until today. So yeah, I don't spend quite so long on social media. I usually just use Facebook to message friends and publicise my videos because nobody else is going to look at them, usually. But, let's see, what time is it? 1:45 to go for a bit longer and then finish up from there. But, yes. I mean, I'll be looking at trying to get a few videos done in the next few days. So, do you have any sort of idea of what sorts of videos you'd want? Because, I mean, I'd be probably wanting to do a few more proper videos about, you know, specific styles or things like that. But, of course, I need to have some idea of what people want, because I do have sometimes when I think that people want X, but then it turns out they don't. You know, let's say, like the times when I did those, is this weapon good for a zombie apocalypse videos? And I saw there was stuff like zombie go boom, and I thought, okay, the people love this. I'll make a few of my own and give my own thoughts. And then that just stagnated, as pure rubbish. So I thought, okay, obviously the people don't want that. So it'd be good to get direct feedback on what you guys actually want me to, what sorts of topics you guys want me to talk about, really. Oh yes, exercises and stretches for HEMA. Okay. Oh yes, exercise stretching HEMA to a dedicated topic. Oh yes. Let's put that in, hang on. Right. Yes, I shall indeed have a look at doing that. In fact, probably when I'm videoing with someone else like Adam, I could have an extra video produced out of the warm-up perhaps. And it is important actually, because indeed there are certain stretches and warm-up activities you need to do to make sure you're not going to, get a twisted ankle or end up pulling a muscle or doing bad stuff that's going to end up causing long-lasting injuries. So yes, I will look at that. Yeah. In fact, I remember a few things that we do at the HEMA club that I go to, so I could take a few ideas from, well, most of the ideas, to be honest, from them as well, to show the sorts of things we do to loosen up and just warm up the body and prepare for the exercise, and of course make sure that everything's done safely and competently, because as the phrase goes, safety first. So yes, I'll look at doing that. Let's see, I'm not sure if anyone's watching anymore, so I might wrap it up. Let's have a check. Okay, there are only 2 at the moment. well, in that case, tell you what, I will wrap it up for today. It is getting quite late and people will need to be sleeping around here. So, yeah, I'll wrap up this live stream for now. And I'll launch another one. Well, might do one perhaps tomorrow or something. I'm going to be going to my HEMA club tomorrow on Monday, but I could perhaps earlier in the day or something like that do a live question and answer. We'll see. And of course, look at doing things like stretch videos. I'll have a look at, yeah, see if I can do that. Yeah, but yes, good to see you guys, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.